Welcome to the 2-Year Bible, a custom-designed 2-year Bible reading plan with a weekly podcast by myself, Chris Case, pastor here at Resonate Church, and Sarah Pasquale, our executive director.
Hey, everybody.
And so week 7, you're trucking along with us, and hopefully you're enjoying your reading. We're going to be kind of wrapping up here of the book of Genesis. We're getting a little closer to Jerusalem in Luke, and so it's only taken us almost 2 months to get through 2 books. And so
we pick up with Joseph in prison.
Yeah. And so we kind of stopped it at a pretty dark part of the story where Joseph had just gotten imprisoned. But he finds this baker and this wine cupbearer and interprets their dreams. He does what he seems wired to do, which is be able to understand people's dreams and interpret it for them.
Yeah. And I don't think we can't deny God's sovereignty in the cupbearer forgetting about Joseph.
Yeah.
There was a reason he was to remain in prison for longer. We don't know that reason necessarily, but God allowed that.
Yeah. 9 years of famine and 7 years of surplus or whatever, vice versa, just doesn't match up as well. So they had to wait 2 more years for the 7 and 7. And so, but Joseph, the cupbearer, knows that Pharaoh has this dream, brings Joe up from the prison cell to help interpret it. And I find it really interesting, and maybe this is in here, maybe it's not, but all the magicians of Pharaoh, all the people who do interpret dreams for him, seem to not be able to figure this dream out. And then Joseph, whose history includes a story of 7 years with a less attractive one, then 7 years with an attractive one, because that's the story of his dad and his mom and stepmom. I don't even know what she would be called, with Rachel and Leah. And I wonder if because of his history, because of his story, he hears this dream and it's like, oh, I know what those 7s are. Those 7s make sense to me because I've seen this before with the 7 ugly cows and the 7 fat cows, or this is like my family. And so he's able to interpret based upon his own experience and history, but maybe not. I just think it might be there.
I think it's really interesting. I think it's a neat connection.
But
worth considering. Here's
the good thing. Joseph is blessing the nations through who he is, through his presence, through his giftings. He is finding a way to bless Egypt and in turn bless all the other nations who will end up in famine and be drawn to Egypt in this process.
Yeah. And despite, a young adulthood of deep, deep suffering, Joseph continues to point to God. He hasn't given up on God. He hasn't rejected God. He trusts God.
Yeah. He's constantly saying God will do this and God will do that, which is great. And then famine hits. Joseph's brothers need some food, and they head down to Egypt to go figure that out. They leave Benjamin behind. Certainly, Jacob is still kind of playing favorites. The 2 kids from Rachel are definitely get preferred status in the household. But they bow down. The dreams that Joseph spoke about are all starting to come true in the story.
Yeah, and I think you can see here in this chapter how guilty his brothers feel over what they did to Joseph. I mean, it's been decades since they've interacted, and they are still thinking anything bad that happens to them is because they're being punished. So, I mean, I don't know that you can choose one, but I kind of think I probably would rather be in prison with a clear conscience rather than live under the weight and guilt of the destruction that they brought on their brother.
That's good. That'll preach. And so, but we get an odd break to me because Reuben here goes, hey, why don't I, instead of me offering myself as a sacrifice, why don't I offer my 2 sons? And then the very next story, we find about Judah being the one who actually steps up in the story. I kind of feel bad for Simeon. They left Simeon behind in Egypt, and they don't actually go back and deal with the Simeon problem until they run out of more food. But Judah's the one who steps up, which once again, it's the redemption of Judah in the story. He's the one who really caused this problem, but now he's the one saying, look, if I'm willing to die, to go, send me, when Reuben's like, send my kids. And so, in some ways, Jesus is like the better Judah here. Like Judah is willing to offer his own death for the saving of a brother, and Jesus does that for the saving of his brothers and sisters.
And it's a reminder to us to trust God's timing and softening hearts. Many of us have maybe had a circumstance or an experience in our life where we are holding bitterness or anger towards someone, or we believe they will never, ever, ever do right. But we all want God to show us mercy and patience as our hearts soften. So let's be generous in showing mercy and patience to others as God softens their hearts as well.
Yeah, that's great. And then the brothers end up in Egypt again, and Joseph kind of tests them and hides a cup and goes through this whole rigmarole of trying to see if things have really changed for his brothers. I think it is a genuine test for him of going, hey, have my brothers changed? I think Joseph has forgiveness of his brothers, but he also wants to see, are they different than they used to be? And Judah, once again, and is willing to lay his life down for Benjamin, who is the one that kind of gets tricked into being caught. And Judah's like, look, take my life, don't take his. And it's pictures of Jesus once again.
And I just want to read verses 5-8 of chapter 45 because it's central to this book and it becomes a theme that we follow through all of the rest of the Bible.
Yep.
Joseph says to his brothers, come near to me. And they came near. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And it's a powerful resolution and reconciliation there of Joseph offering forgiveness to his brothers and also saying what we now say with Romans 8:28 is God works for our good and his glory in all things.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting because God takes a less active speaking role and very much a background sovereignty role in the struggle of Joseph and his family. And yeah, for an Israelite who was in slavery, it's like, okay, God never really left us. Like, circumstances were terrible. Yes, we were imprisoned in Egypt, just like Joseph was, but God hasn't left us. And so we'll see that. We'll see that in the Exodus story where it's like God saw, God remembered, all these sort of phrasings around how God responds. And then Joseph provides for his brothers and his family. He takes care of them. He welcomes them in. They have food. They have provision. And Joseph uses his power, his position, his title, all that to provide salvation for his brothers and forgiveness, which, I mean, that's Jesus all over it. Again, Jesus is just the better Joseph who provides for his brothers and sisters. He provides forgiveness for them and salvation in a new kingdom in some ways. So, yeah. So let's do some New Testament. Let's jump ahead back to Luke in Luke 10. So last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago now, you would have read Jesus' kind of final wrap up of that week. They celebrating that some people's names were written in heaven and all these kind of things. But I think he keeps kind of going with that idea where he thanks God that some eyes were opened and that. But it's interesting because the way he uses this language, I mean, there's various things that point towards a Reformed theology, and we'll deal with those particularly in Paul. But like some of Jesus's sayings, there's no way around them. He basically says, "No one knows except those who are chosen by the Son." And there's something about salvation being in the hands of Jesus and at his revealing, opening eyes, allowing people to see. They're in his hands. But yeah.
Yeah, and Jesus says things specifically to his disciples versus other things to large groups of people. And I think part of that is to prepare the disciples for what's to come after he's resurrected and ascended, and they're the leaders of the new church. Mm-hmm.
But then Jesus teaches a fairly well-known parable, and a parable that we name whole ministries after around this world. And so the parable of the Good Samaritan. And a lawyer comes up asking these questions. And he's asking actually fairly common debate questions, things that were debated amongst teachers and other lawyers and how people interpret the law. And Jesus turns it on him and is like, well, how do you answer that question? And then he answers in a way that follows a pretty popular rabbinic camp at the time. And then Jesus does something a bit abnormal from that point on. There was a common storytelling where you have the same parameters in order to kind of interpret the story and see how different teachers interpret. And so there was a common story way of telling a story where there was a priest, there was a Levite, and then there was either an Israelite or a Pharisee in a storyline. And the priest and Levite usually do the wrong things, and the Pharisee or the Israelite do the right things. But here, Jesus flips it and goes, there was a priest, there's a Levite, and then there was a Samaritan, where it's like crickets in that or in the crowd that would be like, who?
Yeah, if you did your research last week, Samaritans are despised.
Yeah, I mean they worship the wrong thing. They worship up
in the wrong
mountain.
Place.
Yeah, they're mixed in terms of genetics. So like the Israelites would have looked at that as like a threat to the Messiah's line. And there's all sorts of different pieces of why they dislike the Samaritans, rightfully or wrongly. But Jesus is here. Elevating the Samaritan as sort of the hero of the story, the one who they would have hated. Their enemy is the one who is showing neighborly love towards somebody else. And not only that, but like, I mean, this is another great Jesus tie-in. Like,
yeah, so we see that we are facing a certain death until a man who was rejected by the Jews brings healing and leaves a deposit to keep him in care, and he goes away and promises to return and pay his debts. That's Jesus. So we interpret this in two ways, and one is that Jesus has done this for us. We're the person dying at the roadside, and Jesus was the Good Samaritan. And on the other side, Jesus says, go and do likewise. We are to look for those who are on the margins, for those who are forgotten, for those who are dying in their sin and also just uncared for, dying because of social justice issues, and care for them.
Yeah.
Sacrifice ourselves to help bring them to health and to salvation.
Yep. Yeah, the answer to who's my neighbor is not the person that lives next door necessarily.
No, and it's Jesus answers how to be a neighbor. He doesn't answer who your neighbor is.
Right. And the judgmentalism still the lawyer where he's like, the one who showed mercy. He doesn't even say the Samaritan. Yeah. He's like, I can't even say the name.
Say the word.
Yeah. It's interesting. And then Martha and Mary, which I would argue is probably more about heart postures than it is about the fact that Martha's busy and Mary's not. There's Mary who's listening to the teachings, but the way Martha's described, it's less about her busyness, but like Jesus points out things about her heart. She's anxious, she's troubled, she's distracted. There's something about her attitude, and not the fact he doesn't go, why are you so busy? It's like, why are you anxious? Why are you troubled? That there's something about her heart that's just not matching up.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of women's ministries and churches in general will preach like, be a Mary, not a Martha. And I think that's a misunderstanding of the passage. We all have different gifts to use, but it's about our heart posture and who we're serving.
Right.
And it is important for us to sit at the feet of Jesus. And that was a posture of disciples back then. So what Jesus was doing was giving a tremendous amount of dignity and invitation to women who in other areas and circles were not allowed to be learning at the feet of rabbi. So he's very, very countercultural here and inviting women to have equal place in learning alongside men.
Yeah, absolutely. And Luke certainly wants to highlight those parts of the story. And be a Mary, not a Martha. Yes, be a Mary, but not in the way of busyness versus not. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because Maria is certainly highlighted as the good versus the bad, but yeah, don't have the anxious, troubled heart. And then Jesus teaches the Lord's Prayer here, where in Matthew this would have been during the Sermon on the Mount, but Luke has it right here. And there's some other ancient traditions that Jesus might be using as part of the Lord's Prayer. There were ways that people prayed in sort of liturgical synagogue settings, but I think the simplicity is Jesus is like, look, just pray. I don't think he gives us a difficult template. It's a pretty straightforward prayer. It's not the most complicated thing to interpret, and covers some of the major points of how to pray. Like address God, think about God's holiness, talk about God's kingdom, talk about God's provision for you, understand forgiveness, and understand like sanctification in the process. And so like that covers a pretty wide breadth of the Christian experience, and Jesus teaches them to pray that way. And then he includes this kind of follow-up statement of asking and knocking, and I think the little parable there, I think, is simply to say, so just pray, like be direct, ask for what you need, and even more importantly, reminding them the one you're talking to is like a good father. Like it deals with a little bit of how we approach God in prayer, like. Even in the Lord's Prayer, you address him as Father, but you also talk about his kingship. Like he's a dad, but he's also the king. Like all the different ways I think that make sometimes prayer, like there's a very personal, with boldness, confidence, we can approach the throne. Like there's some of that, but then there's
a reverence.
The king. Yeah, he's also the king, the creator, like
the sovereign
know who you're
one.
still talking to.
Yeah, and this is another reminder that we need to know Scripture if we're going to ask according to God's will. You have to know what God's will is. You can't just decide it because you feel it.
Yeah, when you say thy kingdom come, well, what's his kingdom about? Well, he's told us in his word. And then we get these people accuse Jesus of driving out demons and doing so in the name of demons, which is that much more confusing. And Jesus points out, hey, that doesn't line up. Like, the demons aren't in civil war with each other. That doesn't even make any sense to what you're accusing me of. And then he gets into this conversation about stronger man, which Jesus is the stronger man. Like that's also not the hardest thing to interpret. There's Beelzebub, or maybe it's tied into Beel. Like, he is stronger than any demonic force out there. And he's making that clear. Like, he is the one who is the strong man, who is bound, can bind demons, and has done so. But then there's an interesting tie-in between all these little sections, because we're going to get to the section where he's talking about now, like, when you drive out demons, but the house is empty, and when they come back, and maybe like that much worse. And it's interesting because at the end of the Lord's Prayer section around verse 13, it talks about asking for the Holy Spirit. And I wonder if that is all tied into the same theme of like, look, Jesus drove out the demons, but if we don't fill the empty house with the Spirit of God, it's going to be problematic. And Jesus like, ask for that. Ask for the Spirit's filling. Ask for God's presence. Like, that's the goal here. Driving out demons only accomplishes so much, and it may actually make things worse if we don't fill what has been driven out with the presence, with the Spirit of God. And it's such an important piece, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's good for us to remember as we fight sin, there's a place for discipline and not putting ourselves in the position of temptation. But there's also ways that we try to do it by our own strength. And we set up rules and make structures so we don't sin, but we're not considering the heart and the transformation that happens. And we keep falling into the same sin patterns again and again and again, when we have to understand that the only cleansing from sin is the work of Christ renewing us.
Yeah, I wonder how much sometimes our try and deal with sin is looking to the driving out of the demons and not beholding Christ and seeing Christ as better and more satisfying than whatever it is that is drawing our attention away from him.
Yeah.
And then there's this the section that Sarah and I got some good laughs out of this woman just kind of shouting out in the middle of the crowd around Jesus's mom and how blessed she is. And so I just imagine like the rumble of a whole crowd following him, and her just yelling out is like, "Blessed is the womb." And then Jesus kind of responding to her, "Blessed rather is the one who does what I tell him to do." And so it's such a little weird moment, but it is a fulfillment of prophecy. I mean, we hear about Mary, that people will rise up and call her blessed. And literally someone has rised up and called her blessed in the storyline. But Jesus, once again, kind of elevating of like, look, this is what real blessing looks like, to follow me. Yes.
Yeah, it's found through Christ and his word, not through who you have like rubbed shoulders with.
And that's what made Mary blessed, was that she listened to the Lord and obeyed. And so,
yeah.
And then the sign of Jonah, that little section. I think what's at hand here is like, look, like the sign of Jonah, like the Gentiles of Nineveh, these pagan Gentiles heard God's message and they repented. And this like Gentile queen of Sheba heard about the wisdom of God through Solomon, and she came, she was drawn to it. And like Jonah was like a terrible prophet, and the Gentiles still repented. But Jesus saying, look, I'm here. I'm giving signs. Like, you guys want all these signs. I'm here. I'm present. And you guys aren't understanding it. You're rejecting it. You're wanting the wrong things. Like, I'm present with you. The one greater than Jonah is here with you right now. And the Gentiles repented of that, but you guys aren't even listening to this. And I think it's a challenge to them. Yeah,
and he did it intentionally when the crowds are increasing, and maybe in some ways as a deterrent or just a reminder. Again, the call to follow Christ is a call to come and die. And being a follower of Christ doesn't mean that life will be easy, and we don't want to make it so compelling and neglect as we share with people the fact that it's also an invitation to death and a challenging life.
Definitely. And I think post-resurrection, I mean, there's also a way to interpret the sign of Jonah, the 3 days in the belly, the prophet who was in the belly for 3 days and ultimately brought about repentance on the other side. Absolutely. But for the crowd, they wouldn't have thought that way. I think they're thinking like, Jonah who went to the Ninevites who we did not like. And then this conversation about light and And I think what Jesus has at hand here with the good eye and the conversation about good eye is really how you see the world. Do you see the world through light, the good eye, which ultimately Jesus is the light and Jesus is the lamp lighter. Do you see the world as Jesus sees it, or do you see it differently? Do you see it, I don't know, pessimistically? Do you see it through consuming and patriotism? Do you see it all the different ways that we can sometimes have a certain worldview? Or do you see it through the worldview in the lens of Jesus?
Yeah, or even eternal versus temporary. Do we believe what is true is what we can see in front of us and touch, or do we believe it's heaven and our eternal life and inheritance?
Yeah, do we see it through the lens of Jesus' kingdom, both here and in the future?
Yeah, so with Psalm 105, we're looking back at what God has done with the patriarchs. We're remembering God's goodness and faithfulness to his people, not because they earned it, but because God offered it. And so I'd encourage you to pull out Psalm 105 and write your own psalm like that. Look at your own history and write down what God has done.
Yeah, and then I love how Eugene Peterson talks about one of these lines. He rephrases it. He says, "Keep your eyes open for God, watch for his works, be alert for signs of his presence." Like we just talked about that. Like have a good eye. Be one who looks for God's works and sees God's works and remembers how God works, so you can see the world as is.
Yeah.
So what should we look for next week?
So in the Old Testament, follow Jacob's heart change. This is an exciting week of learning more about Jacob and seeing him change his heart. And pay attention to when he's referred to as Jacob or when he's referred to as Israel in Genesis. And then in the New Testament, I'd say the main emphasis of next week's reading is going to be a challenge to really consider the eternal impact of what we do and the difference between salvation and judgment. So pay attention to the different parables and analogies Jesus gives to help us understand salvation and judgment.
Yeah, and as you read through the New Testament, there's definitely a good number of Old Testament callbacks in this section. Little stories, little phrases that I think Jesus is picking up on that help bring a little more context to exactly what Jesus is saying. So use cross references. Try to look those things up because I think it'll really help you. And other than that, thanks, y'all.
Thanks.